Have you ever stopped to think about the fate of the soldier who pierced Jesus' side with a spear? That silent figure, wrapped in iron, dust, and authority, who approached the lifeless body of Christ and, with a single blow, sealed the end of one story, or perhaps the beginning of another. Who was he? A simple Roman executioner following orders? A man indifferent to the pain around him? Or could he have, in that very moment, been an involuntary witness to a miracle so profound that unknowingly he pierced his own heart along with the body he stabbed? The Bible, in John 19:34, describes the act precisely. One of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. Simple, direct, almost clinical. But behind these few words lies a universe of mysteries. Why blood and water? Why was this detail recorded among so many others? The brutal gesture, the one that ended Jesus' suffering, might have seemed inhuman. But what if, paradoxically, it carried within it the seed of revelation? What if the instrument of violence, the spear, was also a key to repentance? Imagine the scene. A sky darkened at noon, the earth trembling beneath your feet, the smell of iron, sweat, and fear in the air. Around, soldiers in silence, a crowd at once outraged and confused. And at the center, the cross, and at the foot of the cross, he, the soldier, still for a moment, a witness to something his training had not prepared him to understand. He lifts the spear, and instead of finding just flesh, he touches an eternal riddle. From that open wound, not just blood pours out, water also pours out. A detail that theologians have called a sign. A physiological miracle, yes, but also spiritual. The source of purification, the symbol of baptism, of new life, of the eternal covenant. According to Christian traditions, this soldier was given a name, Longinus, an experienced centurion, battle-hardened by wars and executions, a man accustomed to ordering deaths as if signing papers. But that day was not like the others. The darkness in the sky seemed to weigh on his shoulders. The earthquake seemed to break more than the earth. It seemed to crack his certainties. And Jesus' silence, his prayer for his enemies, the gentle surrender of his spirit, all of this began to erode the stone in his chest. The spear was his last gesture as an executioner, but perhaps the first as someone who was starting to see. And if that spear, seemingly the final blow of death, was actually the first touch of life, a spark of awakening he didn't even know he needed? The gospel is full of paradoxes. The weak are exalted, the humiliated are lifted up, and even the executioners can be reached by mercy. The spear, which seemed to end Christ's story, opened another, that of the soldier. In that moment, while the blood ran down the spear's shaft, perhaps something else ran inside him, the armor of his soul, broken by contact with the divine. And so the question arises that has echoed through the centuries like a sacred echo. Who really was pierced that day? Jesus, certainly physically. But what about the soldier? Longinus bled inside, not with wounds that the eyes could see, but with a heart that was beginning to awaken. There, on the hill of Golgotha, two destinies intertwined. One ended with death, and the other began with it. The soldier who pierced Jesus doesn't disappear into the mists of history. He remains as a symbol that even the hardest can be reached by grace. The cross, after all, was not the end. It was the portal to a new beginning. A Roman centurion's life wasn't made of tenderness. It was sculpted with iron, blood, and obedience. He didn't command just men, he commanded fear. For every decision, a life could be taken. For every hesitation, punishment was immediate. This soldier, who would later be known as Longinus, was no rookie. He was a man shaped by the weight of the sword, the shouts of battles won, and the dull eyes of prisoners before execution. He had witnessed death more times than mercy, and over time, he had learned to silence his own soul. It was necessary. To live, he had to harden. But on that dark afternoon, amidst the dust of Jerusalem and the divided shouts of the crowd, something was amiss. He had already witnessed too many crucifixions. He knew the pattern. The condemned pleads, the condemned screams, the condemned curses. But that man on the cross was different. There was a strange peace in him, a silence that weighed more than any cry of pain. Jesus did not retaliate insults, did not demand revenge, did not beg for help. His eyes, still full of life, were fixed on the sky. It was as if he was speaking to someone invisible, as if he trusted, as if he knew. Longinus was not ignorant. He was pragmatic. He observed everything. He evaluated. He kept control. But at that moment, his control began to slip through his fingers. While his companions mocked, throwing dice over the crucified man's bloodied garments, he remained still. Something was wrong. Or rather, something was profound, inexplicable. Jesus, with his body already mutilated and hanging, still found the strength to pray, but not for himself. He prayed for them, for those who had whipped him, for those who had nailed him, for those who were now laughing at his pain. Father, forgive them. Those words, whispered in agony, hit Longinus harder than any sword. He didn't know how to explain it. Not yet, but there was a discomfort growing inside him, an old discomfort, forgotten, that he thought he had buried in the trenches of war. War shapes men, it's true, but it doesn't heal them. It only silences, temporarily, the pain that will eventually come to the surface. And on that day, by the cross, Jesus' silence spoke louder than any imperial order. What he was witnessing didn't fit into Rome's protocols. It wasn't military strategy. It was sacred, profound, painful. How many soldiers, years later, tried to forget that afternoon? How many returned home with medals, but couldn't close their eyes without reliving the moment when the earth trembled and the sky darkened? Longinus, however, wasn't just marked by that day. He was called by it, not as a warrior, but as a witness. His soul, once dormant from the routine of death, was starting to wake up, and every gesture of Jesus, every word spoken in the midst of pain did not hurt the flesh, but the armor he had forged around his own heart. It was noon, but the sky no longer obeyed man's clock. The light disappeared, not gradually, like at sunset, but abruptly, almost violently. A dense darkness fell over the earth like a cosmic mourning. The sun fell silent. The world seemed to hold its breath. That shadow wasn't natural. It was as if the universe had gone silent in the face of a tragedy that went beyond what human eyes could understand. It was as if creation itself was mourning the death of its creator. And there, standing before the cross, the centurion watched. But he didn't just see darkness, he saw signs. Tremors shook the ground as if the earth was trying to free itself from the pain. Rocks broke with sounds that echoed like muffled screams. And in Jerusalem, far away, an even more symbolic event was happening. The veil of the temple, the one that separated men from the presence of God, tore from top to bottom. Invisibly, something eternal was being revealed. The sky cried out a truth that human hearts still didn't want to hear. The one hanging on the cross was more than a man. He was the Son of God. Longinus wasn't a theologian. He didn't read scrolls. He didn't make sacrifices. He was a soldier, a man of weapons, not prayers. But in that moment, as the heavens went silent and the earth cracked, he understood more of God than many who wore cloaks and crowns. He saw with the eyes of the body, yes, but began to see with the eyes of the soul. That death, that scene, that deafening silence. Everything screamed one thing. This wasn't the end of just any man. It was the fulfillment of something much greater. And then, amidst the chaos, he spoke. Not loudly to his soldiers, nor as a command, but as someone who had just awakened from a millennial sleep. Truly, this was the Son of God. His words weren't just a report. They were a confession, a surrender, a renunciation of ignorance, and a surrender to truth. He knew that saying that aloud could cost him his position, maybe even his life. But at that moment, no Roman authority was greater than the authority he recognized before him, that of the Lamb who died in silence for those who wounded him. The darkness that surrounded him was more than climatic. It was spiritual. It was as if God was allowing the world to feel the weight of sin. But Longinus, who had so often been an agent of death, now found himself face to face with the birth of faith. Amidst the shouts of the crowd, some mocking, others desperate, his inner voice rose. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't beg for answers. He simply recognized. And that recognition, coming from a man like him, carried more weight than 1,000 sermons. It was the soul of a soldier being washed by the light of an unexpected truth. Nature, which trembled in pain, was becoming more sensitive than the human hearts present that day. But the centurion, the one who was supposed to simply observe and control, became a living part of the mystery. He, who just moments ago was just another executor of the empire, was now intertwined with the fate of the one he had pierced. The blood that ran from the spear didn't condemn him. The blood called him. The veil tore in the temple, and also within him. The separation between him and God began to unravel, and what started as a military execution ended as a divine calling. Longinus's transformation wasn't a sudden explosion of faith like a lightning bolt cutting through the skies. It was a slow, silent fire that started with a spark, and that spark was Jesus's gaze, his prayer, his silence. The mind of a soldier trained to resist pain and suppress emotions doesn't surrender easily. It takes time. It takes internal conflict. It takes deep cracks. But like a blade that pierces flesh, the compassion of that crucified man had reached a point that all the previous wars had failed to reach: the soul of the executor. Longinus began the day with firm hands and an impassive gaze. He ended it, torn between the duty imposed by the empire and the faith that, even timidly, began to sprout like a thread of light among the ruins of who he was. He didn't witness just another condemned man's death. He saw the incarnation of the sacred suffer, and suffer with dignity. He saw someone who, with all the reasons in the world to hate, chose to love. Someone who, suspended between heaven and earth, cried for forgiveness not for himself, but for those who killed him. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Those words, spoken with the weak voice of one on the brink of their last breath, echoed inside Longinus with a strength no war trumpet had ever produced. The silence of the cross was louder than the cries of the battlefield. It was a silence that shouted truths that disarmed. The traditions of the early church would identify him with a new name, a new identity: the converted centurion, the redeemed soldier, the first executioner to become a disciple. Some accounts say he abandoned the weapons and dedicated the rest of his life to preaching about the one who wounded him. Others say he was martyred for refusing to deny his new faith. But at this point in history, what matters is not whether he went to Cappadocia or Rome. What matters is that he walked toward the light. He chose to believe. He chose to transform his act of violence into a bridge to grace. The spear that pierced Jesus' side ended up opening his own heart. It would have been easy to return to routine, to forget the signs, to swallow the discomfort, and bury the experience under the orders of the empire. That's what many did. But Longinus didn't take that path. Something had broken inside him, and what breaks under God's touch cannot be rebuilt with the world's tools. He understood that he couldn't go back to being the same. That day was not just a memory, it was a divide. The cross wasn't just the end of the Messiah, it was the beginning of his own inner resurrection. Because that's how God works. He doesn't call the saints, he calls the broken. He doesn't point to those who are clean, he chooses the stained. The persecutor becomes the apostle, the traitor, the ambassador, the guilty, the witness. And the cross, for Longinus, was more than a scene. It was the altar of a new birth. That Roman soldier, hardened by wars and training, discovered that his greatest victory would not be won with a sword, but with faith. He was never the same again. Because no one, when truly looking at Jesus on the cross, can leave whole. Either you walk away, or you kneel. And now, look deep inside yourself. What would you have done if you were there before that cross with the spear in your hands? Would you have looked at Jesus and seen just another man defeated by the system? Would you have hidden behind routine and coldness, as if the scene was just another among many? Or would you have felt eternity tearing through the fabric of time, right in front of you, like a tear in the veil between heaven and earth? Because deep down, the story of the soldier who pierced Christ's side is not just about him. It's about me. It's about you. It's about all of us. Every time we wound with words, mock faith, or ignore God's love, we wield the same spear, and still, grace calls us. The cross was never just about Jesus' suffering. It's about our response, about what we choose to do when truth presents itself before us with the marks of the nails. It confronts us with something we cannot ignore, the love that dies in our place and still extends its hand. Longinus thought he was ending a story with that spear, but he was sealing the beginning of another. What seemed like the end was the foundation of a new chance. The cross is more than wood, blood, and pain. It's the intersection between justice and mercy, between what we deserve and what we receive. The greatest scandal of the Christian faith is not simply that God died, but that he chose to die for us, for me, for you, for those who still deny him. And that, hanging on that cross, he forgave, not later, not when everything was over, but there, at the height of pain. Father, forgive them, That is the most powerful sound in the universe. The centurion heard it with his ears and with his soul. We hear it now by faith. And if we let it, that faith transforms us too. It tears us inside like the veil of the temple and remakes us. Perhaps you're watching this as someone who already believes, or perhaps you're full of doubts, tired of religiosity, searching for something that truly gives meaning to life. But the question that has echoed since that dark day at Golgotha remains alive. Who do you say I am? Longinus answered with courage, not with all the answers, but with a certainty that was born in the encounter between the human and the divine gaze. And you? Will you continue ignoring the signs? Or will you recognize the voice that still whispers from the cross to your heart? Because the fate of the soldier teaches us something essential. No one is too far gone. Not even the one who wounds can be considered irredeemable. God transforms the executioner into a disciple, the blasphemer into a preacher, the man of the spear into a witness to the miracle. That's the beauty of the cross. That's the boldness of grace. And this is your chance to let the spear fall, to draw near, to start over. The cross stands, and the invitation still stands with it. If this story touched your heart in some way, if you felt something different when hearing about the fate of that soldier, then don't ignore that feeling. Maybe God is speaking to you now, just like he spoke to Longinus that day. And if you've come this far, it's because something inside you is seeking more meaning, more truth, more faith. So leave your like as a form of support and gratitude. It helps a lot to spread this message to more people who also need to hear it. And if this word spoke to you, write just one word in the comments. Amen. Simple as that. I'll know you stayed until the end, and that your heart is open to what God is doing. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to keep up with reflections like this. There's a lot more coming. Real stories, deep lessons, and messages that can transform your day, or even your life. Also, activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos. The cross still speaks, and if you've heard it, respond. See you in the next video. God bless you.